So I am very happy to welcome back to the show, friend of the show, Vinay Orekondy. Vinay is an attorney, an activist, and an advocate for ranked choice voting. Vinay, thanks for taking the time today.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
So can you start by just to people in the audience who might not actually have any idea what ranked choice voting is? Can you just give a brief explainer of how it differs from our current system?
Yeah, so in the US, you've got a system that, well, most of you use a system called first past the post, right? Now, essentially what it is that when you go into a voting booth, you just go and you vote for one candidate, right? Like there's 10 candidates on the ballot, you know, and you just have to pick one. You go and vote for them, and that's the end of your vote, right? In a system called the system called ranked choice voting, where which is used in Australia, where I'm from. Imagine that you could rank those candidates, say one, two, three, four, in order of how you like them, right? So, like, let's say, and that way you don't have to distinguish between candidates. Like, let's instead of having to agonize, oh, I really like this one, but I also really like this candidate. Instead, you can say, okay, well, this is my favorite candidate. I'm going to give them a one. This other candidate, which I like, but not quite as much as the other one, I'll give them a two, and so forth. For as many candidates as you want, you can rank them. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it would perhaps cut into some of the. I think there are a lot of people in this country who are afraid to vote for perhaps their favorite candidate, whether that's in a primary or a general, out of fear of their least favorite candidate winning because they didn't give their vote to some candidate they aren't so hot on. Can you talk about how this could impact people's voting habits?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you just described is called strategic voting, where people actually they will make a they have a particular candidate that they want to vote for, but out of fear of assisting the rival major party of their choice, well, the rival major party, they will go and vote for the major party on their side, right? So what essentially that does is that fear of helping the other major party keeps these two parties really consolidating the votes behind each other. So what you've got a situation now is what ranked choice voting does is it allows people to vote for candidates across a spectrum. So let's say there's a major party that you know that supports some of your values, but they're not your favorite choice, right? But you have another favorite candidate. Let's say they're an independent. You might vote one for the independent, right? Two for a smaller party, and three for that major party. Now, if you're that independent or that smaller party don't win, then your vote will still get collected by that major party. So let's explain how that it works in practice in terms of how they count. Um, so the way it works is it's often called a single transferable vote. So if you are voting, let's say you voted for this independent, the way they count it is that they'll look at all the number ones that, and if whoever is the least number of ones will get eliminated, and then their votes get redistributed to all the twos. So let's say your independent of choice, all right, has got the least number of ones next to them. Then that vote, your vote, will get moved to who your number two was. Let's say it's a minor party, right? Let's say they're the next group to get eliminated because they have the least number of ones in that round, right? In that second round. At that point, they get eliminated and then we'll go to your third choice, which is a major party. So what that means is that you can safely vote for your candidate of choice and not be afraid that you're helping another major party, right? Or like an opponent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, and it sounds like a significantly more democratic and representative system than we currently have. You obviously are from Australia. Can you talk about how the results in Australia and how the political system in Australia operates differently because of ranked choice voting?
Yeah, so we've had it for about 100 years in Australia, and there's two major changes or major differences that I'll say that come from that. The first is the composition of our parliament, and second is the kind of the tone and the the feel of how our politics operates. So first on the composition of our parliament is a lot more diverse than U.S. Congress. Simply put, we have um, Ooh, we've got at least three or four parties, a whole lot of independents. We still have a two-party system, right? We still have two major parties, and they do represent large interests in society, but we have a lot more parties in place. Even one of those major parties, we kind of take it for granted and refer to them as a single party, but they're themselves a coalition of two parties. In fact, they're called the coalition. It's the Liberal National Coalition. And one of them is our kind of the Liberal Party. It's a bit confusing for Americans because Liberal in Australia is conservative. But the Liberal Party is sort of our city conservatives. The National Party is sort of our country conservatives. And they knew that independently they couldn't have a governing coalition. So they are separate parties, but they formed a semi-permanent coalition, and they pool their candidatures together in order to form a governing
Mm.
coalition. So that in itself is huge, right? If you like, one of your two major parties is actually a coalition of two parties. But beyond that, we have representatives from the Greens. We have representatives from the like a group of like small party, like the Bob Catter party. He's an independent. He's the only one. We have someone from the United Australia Party. We have a far right party called One Nation. We have uh, a whole bunch of just independents. There's a group called the Teal Movement, which I'll actually want to tell you about more about in a moment. A lot of these people actually only came in the last election. So, I mean, some of these independents have been sitting in Parliament for a long time, like Bob Catter. He's been there for years. But in our last election, our last federal election, 10% of our House was replaced by a minor party and an independent in one go, right? There was a lot of major party dissatisfaction. And so in one go, all of them were replaced, right? And
My
now,
gosh.
yeah, and that's like, that's the thing. It's not instantly, I want to say this is that ranked choice voting isn't instantly disadvantageous to major parties. If they're popular, they'll do well and it can actually assist them. But if they're unpopular, it reflects the will of the people, right? That's the
Hmm.
truth of ranked choice voting. So, um, and that's to how it could actually assist a major party or a minor party, really. That gets into the tone of how it works. Is so what does it mean in practice? Like on paper, it sounds like okay, well, voters get to rank the candidates of their choice, but how does that affect the elections, right? And affect the conduct of elections. What it means is that if you're running for office, right, you want to get the rankings of other candidates, right? You want the other people who are in the race, you want their voters to rank you as two, three, four, or five, right? Because
Yeah.
that's how you win, right? Because if they get eliminated, then you'll pick up their votes. So instantly, that means that you can't completely alienate the other voters, right? And
Yeah.
obviously, you could do if someone's your complete opposite. It's still politics, right? If you're the Green Party and you know, you're you're just never going to pick up rankings from a Trump supporter. I mean, ostensibly, unless not in this universe, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So what that means is that um, you could still alienate certain groups if that's necessary for your political strategy. But let's say you're a Green Party and or let's say you're a Democrat, right? And you're running as a Democrat, and instead of like just alienating the Green voters and saying stop playing spoiler, you'd have to say, okay, well, how do I pick up the number two rankings of those Green people? And so I'm not going to attack them. I'm going to respect their right to vote Green, and I'm going to calculate. Look, based on the polling, the Green candidate is probably going to get eliminated currently in the first or second round. So one, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be polite to the candidate. If that's a easy one. Two, I'm going to like not try and destroy them. You know,
Hmm.
big shift in American politics, right?
Hmm.
And third, and I think very importantly, is that I'm going to start adopting some of their policies, right?
Yep. It
And
actually incentivizes coalition building in this sense.
yes, and lobbying, right? So
Hmm.
I was very involved in this thing called how to vote cards in Australia. So in Australia, how to vote cards are when small parties will often just run a candidate for like they know they're not going to win. And there might be a single issue party, it might be like the voluntary euthanasia party, right? They know they're not going to win. But what they'll do is they'll run this candidate on the basis that um, that this, that they'll pick up a small percentage of the vote in a close race, right, and be able to lobby the other candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to adopt their policy, and I've seen not-for-profit organizations run candidates on this base. They'll run an independent, just locally, and
Mm-hmm.
that gives them. And in a really tight race, you've got this independent candidate picked up 2% of the vote, and there's less than 2% separating the major parties. Who suddenly has the power in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that it really does shift power into some of these smaller coalitions and parties and organizations, and it also, as you pointed out, it influences the major parties, platform. And when in office, they may actually have to follow through on things because, I'll speak for me on this. I get so tired of watching the Democrats do virtually nothing for most of their rule, and then when election season comes around, it's either us or those big scary fascists over there on the right. So it would actually force them to follow through on promises and to do some things that help the people in order to stave off these other coalitions that could be forming, that now are no longer left out to dry by our electoral process.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is that it doesn't, like, it's just it is a more democratic system in that it doesn't actually automatically help smaller parties or larger parties, right? So
Right.
here's how it helps larger parties, right? Is that if you're a larger party, and like right now in the United States, if you're a third party voter, a lot of third party independent voters, they've just kind of given up, and they just don't turn up, right? And that's in Australia, we don't even have that problem because voting is compulsory, right?
Hmm.
But here, a lot of people who become disillusioned, they just don't show up. Getting out the vote for a party that's likely their votes are likely to rank you is in your interest if you're a larger party. So if
Hmm.
you're a Democrat, it's in your incentive to get Green voters to show up and to
Hmm.
rank you, right? So that helps you because if they don't show up, you run the risk of, like, lower turnout is how you lose elections, right? So
Hmm.
everyone can benefit large as long as you're wise about it. And the beauty of ranked choice voting is that the way you play it effectively is all positive. It leads towards, greater dialogue between candidates, a greater politeness and, like, kindness between candidates. I've literally sat in campaign rooms in Australia where someone dug up some dirt about an opponent, and they were like, should we run this? And the candidate has said, no, we want to pick up their preferences or their ranks,
Huh.
right? And it was, and for the record, the stuff was nothing that was beneficial for the democratic discourse, something with their personal life, and just
Hmm.
garbage, right? And the candidates said no, right? Whereas in America, it would be like, oh, let's jump on this,
Oh,
let's
that's a gold
destroy them.
line.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, 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 yeah,
let's wreck them, right? But here,
yeah,
it's like in Australia, it's moved politics in a much more transactional direction on the policy front, and I think in America, it's like that sounds like a negative thing, but it's not. It's like it's people having a dialogue, you know, engaging in trading, right? And
yeah.
there's my cat. Oh, our cat there. So this is Tony. All right. And the and whereas American politics right now is a zero sum game. It's just about
Yeah,
it's two candidates, like one on either side, destroying the other, and that's
yeah,
literally it. And whoever has more resources can just destroy the other, right?
yeah.
And that actually has a third impact, by the way, is that because so much of Australian politics is now, like, you've got these small groups and community groups determining the outcome of elections because they're controlling small percentages of vote, and they're controlling, like, the policy that, well, not controlling, they're influencing, right? Because the candidate doesn't have to take it up, but they're influencing the policy that a candidate might adopt. Suddenly, the group that had all the power in before, which was like moneyed lobbyists, have less of
Hmm.
an incentive to get involved, right? And I've heard this from lobbyist lips in Australia saying, like, why is it that Australian politics is just so much less money? Obviously, it's a smaller country, but even proportionally, it's so much smaller. And they explained it's because we don't know what the outcome of those lobbying, like, or those RCV kind of discussions are going to be. So
Hmm.
it's just like it's not worth getting involved.
Yeah, and there's also a whole lot more candidates that you would have to in the American system. A lot of the wealthy will donate to both parties or both candidates in an important race, knowing that they've effectively bought the favor of either should they be in office. In a ranked choice system, there would be a whole lot more candidates you would have to try to buy off, and it starts to get more expensive very quickly and less worth your, less bang for your buck if you're trying to buy off the political system. I think that's a very nice little side effect.
Right. And there's just no like there's a lot of because a lot of one in ranked choice voting is like a lot more candidates will actually run because there's a point in running. Even if you're not going to win, there's still a point in running because you can influence the thing. And yeah,
Right.
it comes too expensive, but also like you're just not going to if you're a wealthy are you going to donate to that person who has 2% of the vote? Like
Yeah.
it's not like it's just not a viable strategy anymore unless you have like endless money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and even then, a lot of those small candidates, because they know they're not going to win, they have a much stronger incentive. Just tell them to get lost. If
Yeah.
you're a candidate that's like on the verge of winning, and you're a major party candidate, and it's like literally 2% or less separating you, the temptation to take donations from everywhere is extremely high. I can't,
Hmm.
from any source, because that could be literally the difference between winning or not winning. But if you're a
Yeah.
small party candidate, it's so easy to refuse donations from like most sources and say, no, I'm here to make a point. Okay.
Hmm.
So the campaign finance game would change enormously in the US under ranked choice voting. But not a
I
lot of
think
people
that's
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an incredible point that I often don't. You're right. I don't often hear that when we talk about ranked choice voting, um, even from people who support it. But that's a very important point. I want to ask you about actually. First of all, I want to just quickly make the audience aware of Fair Vote, which is an organization that has been really at the forefront of pushing for ranked choice voting. You can go to fairvote.org or follow them at Fair Vote on Twitter to learn more, and I'll keep putting those up throughout the interview here. But on that note, Vinay, how would you describe the state of the movement right now? I know that some local constituencies, like the city in New York and the state of Maine, and I'm sure a couple of others have already adopted ranked choice to some degree or another. Can you talk a little bit about where the movement's at?
Yeah, so the movement actually it's there are about 50 cities in the country that already use it. San Francisco was the first; they adopted about 20 years ago. There's two states which do it statewide: Alaska and Maine. Maine actually uses it for presidential elections, believe it or not. Um, so, but really, the movements is focusing on building from the city level up because there's different levels of comfort and familiarity. We just want to make sure people are comfortable with the new system, and then before we raise the stakes and move it up to to a state level or to a federal level. But if people want to adopt on that level already, they're more than welcome to do so. So the latest large city to have adopted it, as you mentioned, was New York City, about a year or two ago, and they've had their first mayoral election recently under ranked
Hmm.
choice voting. And now there is at least eight, maybe more, maybe I think it's maybe up to 10 um, ranked choice voting ballot measures in November. The largest of which is in Seattle. And in fact, you're in Washington State, right? So there's actually
Yep.
it's actually in three places in Washington State. So it's Seattle, Clark County, and San Juan County.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and Portland, Oregon is the other big city as well. Um, and yeah, oh, and I've also this whole state of Nevada is actually I've got it. It's got it on the ballot. They've also got it alongside another measure called Final Four or Final Five, I believe it is, and what that measure. So they're combining ranked choice voting with that. It's a bit like the Alaskan system, where they kind of have, but yeah, it's so where they'll kind of combine candidates from like multiple parties and so forth. But
hmm
yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, so the
Well, and
movement has got a lot of momentum, to answer your question.
yeah, that's really great to see. And obviously the recent election in Alaska that Sarah Palin somewhat surprisingly lost was, I believe, their first House election using ranked choice voting, and that has gotten it some attention in the media. I have seen some rather reactionary pushback from Republicans who seem to think that the one election is an indication that this is a system that will not be very beneficial to them. Can you talk a little bit about how, the media has portrayed that and how that might impact the movement?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's two reactions there. There's a media's reaction and Republican reaction. I think that the Republican reaction is unfair, specifically because ranked choice actually gave Sarah Palin more of a chance than she didn't otherwise have. So because what happened was that I think Peltola had about
Hmm.
39%, Palin had 30%, and Begich had, my understanding was about like 20 something percent. And so if it was a first past the post, a traditional system, Peltola would have won outright. She had a clear
Hmm.
majority, right? And the other two would have just fallen away, right? But because of ranked choice voting, Begich got eliminated, and a good, like I think maybe 70% is my understanding of his, as you'd expect a
Right,
lot of Republicans would rank another Republican, right? So
right.
70% ranked her as their second choice. So she was able to catch up quite a bit, but
Hmm.
30% ranked Peltolis, and it wasn't enough to catch up. So you look at the
Right.
final result, I think it was only like 3 points that separated them in the end.
Hmm.
So Sarah Palin, she had a shot because of ranked choice voting. If she
Yeah.
didn't, if there was no ranked choice voting, she would have been eliminated straight away. So Republicans that are opposing it need to really look at that result and say, let's think this through, right? Because they might actually be throwing away their best shot at at getting someone elected, including like in November if she runs again, then I think that funnily enough, actually, I think that she might be learning the lessons of ranked choice voting because um, you know she's had a rather inflammatory style in the past, right? To say
That's
the
one way to
least.
put it.
Yeah. Um, Straight after the election, she sent a very nice tweet to the winner, and we were like, "Oh, what's going on here?" So, I mean, maybe she's a changed human being, or
I
maybe
doubt that
she's
one. Or, yeah.
not my place to say, or she's learning how to collect rankings, right? Because that's
Hmm.
how you do it. You don't alienate because I mean she picked up 30% of the no, sorry, she picked up 70%, but clearly
Right.
enough Republicans 30% were willing to like break away from her. So she wants that 30% when she runs again in November, presumably. So not alienating, other candidates is a very good and their voters is a very good first step, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And, I do think, to be fair, that a lot of the conservative blowback on that is like really bad faith. I think that some Republicans have just jumped to this place where any response to a loss is basically it must have been rigged. So now it's, oh, the ranked choice system was to rig they jumped to this place ever since the 2020 election. Um, but I was just
Yeah.
interested to see the result there and see the kind of coverage that it got.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, I think the media has not if you're talking about the more neutral media, like those that don't necessarily have a stake in the outcome, there's been, um, I think some of the coverage has also been a little unfair because they haven't blamed the system for the result. In fact, that numerically they've been more accurate on it. But what they'll often say is that the system is confusing, right? But that's
Mm,
when Alaskans have been polled on it. They've said it's like 90% of them or more have said it's very simple, right? It's
yeah.
it's simple. It's like, do we ever rank things in our daily life? Do we
Yeah.
say we like things more than other things? Like, have
Hmm.
we ever? Is that not a choice? Something we do every day in our life? Right? I think it's quite insulting to voters to say that this is confusing. Anyone who's actually experienced it has realized that it's a system that's really easy and intuitive to use. You just go in, write down the order, like put it in order of what you like, and that's it, right?
Hmm.
And you know, to the extent that it requires shifting, because obviously it is a shift. It's saying, is it a shift that's worth it? And I think, given the state of how broken American politics is, I think there's certainly an incentive to better American politics in a general sense. And I think when
Hmm.
you look at what ranked choice voting actually does, in that how it, um, it democratizes power, it gives power back to people to really not feel forced into make, well, this or that is my choice, right? How it, strips some of the power away uh, from big money, right? I think
Hmm.
all of these things are just phenomenal things. And the fact that it's, largely got bipartisan support, it's got momentum. It's the crack in the armor to improve the American electoral system.
I absolutely agree. And I also wanted to ask you about, we've talked a little bit about the dynamics at the party to party level and how coalitions form there, but I'm also curious how you think it might impact primaries. It seems to me that it could actually make any given party, respond a little bit more to populist sentiments and to what their base actually wants. Can you talk about how it might impact major parties at the primary level?
Yeah, yeah. I think that the so that's interesting. There's no direct comparison with Australia because they have closed primaries, like we don't. Um,
Mm,
Mostly, and this is actually something that America is much better than the US on, is that America has, the voters get involved, whereas in Australia it's a mix of the party honchos, like the people at the top, and to some extent the local branch will choose their candidate, right? So America's actually got the superior system electorally on that front, in my opinion.
hmm.
So let's game out a scenario, um, where, ranked choice voting in a primary. I don't know, let's think, 2020. Okay. Um, so in the 2020 election, um, like the 2020 Democratic primary, um, it would have, like, okay, so you had so you had Bernie in the race, obviously. Okay. I imagine, like, the Bernie supporters, their number two might have been Warren, ostensibly, right?
Hmm.
And potentially vice versa. Although imagine the Warren voters may have been split. Some of them would have ranked Bernie two. Some of them might have ranked, I don't know. Who do you think that the Warren voters might have ranked as number two, other if they
Oh,
were to go
who
right?
was the environmental guy? I can't remember his name. Oh,
I know who you're talking about.
the
The
wealthy dude. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I've forgotten his name, but we'll call him the billionaire guy, all right?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's say, so potentially, if Bernie was just had like cleared, like, let's say, for hypothetically it was just a race between the three of them. Okay. That if Bernie had just gotten 50% of the number one straight out of off the bat, then he would have won, right? Or if any of them had gotten 50% straight away, they would have won. But if you had, like, smaller numbers, right, then it would really, and let's say the key swinging was the Warren voters, right? It would depend which proportion of them, where their twos went. If it was close enough
Right.
between, like, say, Bernie and, um,
Steyer. Tom
Steyer,
Steyer.
thank you. Let's
Yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
like, let's say Bernie and Steyer were, relatively close in numbers, and that Warren was eliminated first, right? She got the lowest number of ones. Then it would come down to who they who the Warren voters, ranked, right? Some of them would have, prioritized Bernie. Some of them would have prioritized Steyer, right? And it just depends how many and to what extent, if it and what their original numbers were on ones, and then how the number two would have added to that. Um,
Hmm.
and so that would have, and who knows? Who knows? Now, and I just made that scenario up because we clearly it wasn't just those three candidates,
Right, right,
but
right.
let's say let's say the actual, you know, Democratic primary, um, that happened. What would have been interesting is like, what we saw happen was that a lot of centrist candidates sort of dropped out right before Super Tuesday and endorsed Joe Biden. Now, and whether that was due to pressure or not, that's kind of not my place to say that. But
It
um,
was.
okay, all right. Well, now here's the question: is those centrist candidates, if they had all like, if their voters were aligned right with each other and they'd all ranked each other, they may have been able to align and win by a candidate like through more legitimate means. But it also depends like what percentage of the vote were they versus Bernie Sanders, right? Well, for
Hmm.
one, you'd have a lot of like you wouldn't have had that fight with Elizabeth Warren that happened. That was kind of ugly and didn't
Yeah.
really work out. So a lot of a good chunk of those Warren voters would have ranked Bernie, right? Assuming like based on how it played out, Warren was one of the first to get eliminated, like in the primary process. Um, so a lot of those twos would have gone to Bernie, so that might have propped him up. But if all those other centrist candidates had kind of ranked each other, and those voters had been as consistent, then maybe they would have won by more legitimate means.
Hmm.
Alternatively, if those centrist candidates, their voters, had a soft spot for Bernie, then he could have actually attracted their number twos. So it really would come down to analyzing who is the number two for a lot of those centrist candidates. And interesting, I think based on the actual polling data, it seems that like Bernie was often the second choice.
He was, even of Biden voters. I remember seeing that poll. He was the number one, number two of Biden voters, if that kind of makes sense. He
Right.
got more number two votes from Biden voters than anybody else. So even though there was this sort of optically, there was this divide, the way the media presented it, there was this divide. I think Bernie was actually coalition building a lot more effectively than a lot of people might realize. And if ranked choice voting was there, I really do wonder how that primary might have gone.
Right. And I think that yeah. So I think if it was as you said, and he was the number two for most of these more centrist candidates, then he would have won pretty
Yep.
easily.
Pretty
Um,
handily. Yep.
Yeah, because as they got eliminated, the votes would have transferred. There's actually two other ways it would affect a primary. Well, sorry, one other way it would affect a primary, and one way it could affect a general, right? In the Bernie example, but the other way it would affect a primary is that candidates keep dropping out early in primaries, right? And it's unfortunate because a lot of people have already voted,
Yeah.
so you get millions and millions of wasted votes. And
Hmm.
what happened? Like that's a big problem if you can only vote for one candidate and your candidate drops out. Like, what if
Hmm.
you're like Washington State? You're one of the last states to vote, right?
Yeah, we fluctuate each time, but this last time we were the week after Super Tuesday, so like over
Okay,
half of
so
the
it's not
country had already gone.
too bad, but still, like often it's kind of decided before you, right, by Super
Yep.
Tuesday. And
Yep.
like there's some states that like at the end, like the vote almost doesn't matter because everyone's dropped out.
Yep.
Um, so that's a big problem, right? And I think that for two, like what happens is that you introduce ranked choice voting. Two things happen: is that you get rid of the wasted vote concept if someone has in the sense that if someone has dropped out, if the voter was allowed to rank other candidates, and in a primary where candidates are going to drop out, it's inevitable. You're incentivized to rank as many as possible because you want your
Hmm.
vote to count, right? I mean, if I was a primary voter, like I'm not a citizen yet, but when I will be, I will vote every candidate in the primary because I want my vote to count.
Right.
So if there are eight candidates and seven of them, or six of them drop out, then I still want my vote. My vote will still count if I rank all of them. So that's the first way. So everyone's vote, and we're talking about like millions of votes here. So it's huge.
Oh
You'll have,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And even
and
more if it does inspire bigger turnout, as you said. So absolutely, yes.
yeah, and the second is that it incentivizes because ranked choice voting is less, the outcome is less predictable. Incentivizes people to stay in the race,
Hmm.
right? Because if you lose like multiple first past the post elections, that momentum that kind of gets that's why like whoever wins Iowa, right? Iowa and New Hampshire have this like godlike
Yep.
power, right?
Yep.
And that's why they're so desperate to hold on to that status. But
Yep.
ranked choice voting, it just totally changes the game. Totally changes the game
Yeah.
because other people can start winning, and it would. Sorry,
No, no, you're good.
Brooklyn being loud at the moment. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, cool. So, as I say, like, so you're incentivized to hang on and see how the dynamics of another state, like maybe a candidate, like obviously momentum will always be important, right? Unless you have a simultaneous primary across the country, momentum will always be important. But
Right.
in one state, the second candidate, like it becomes less important because because people like to jump behind a winner. If you've only got one vote, right? People want to vote with the winner, right?
Right.
But in ranked choice voting, you're not required to do that because you don't
Mm-hmm.
like because your vote is movable. You can still say, well, no, there's still a shot for my candidate, even if they're losing, and that will change people's voting patterns and could keep people in the race who should still be in the race, you know, well until the end.
Yeah. And most importantly, it eliminates the argument that you are somehow wasting your vote if you don't vote for the one that has the momentum. You can still rank that person that has the momentum second or third or fourth above the ones you don't want, and you're not wasting your vote it totally eliminates that argument. And I just want to point out, I think it is kind of the best of both worlds in the sense that um, I've heard the analogy like voting is like taking a bus. You're never going to get dropped at your front door. You take the bus that gets you the closest, right? It is the best of both worlds in the sense that I can vote for the buses that get me the very closest without, getting to the end and allowing my vote to not contribute to keeping a terrible candidate out of office. So it's like you both get to vote for the candidate that you actually like, and you're still able to vote against the candidate that you really don't by ranking them last or leaving them off entirely. Um, so I think it satisfies sort of both philosophies about voting, if you will. Where on the left, I think we've become kind of divided over this. Should I vote? Should I not? Is it worth my time? Am I participating in a system that's rigged against me? All of those concerns are or quelled rather by ranked choice voting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I want to say to populists of all stripes is that I guess that, or anyone who considers, oh, the voting system is rigged, don't bother voting, is like, well, ask why is it rigged? How is it rigged? Right? And ask, is there a specific reform which can tilt the things back in the favor of unrigging it? Right? We can just dismiss it entirely and say, oh, well, the system is bad, right? But
Hmm.
you look at the particular problems that the system has. You look at what ranked choice voting does, and it addresses so many of them. It isn't the ultimate solution to everything. It's not, and it'd be foolish to claim that. But it opens the door in the way that no other reform does, and it's happening and it's doable. It's the pathway. It's not the way. It's not the end point, but it is the pathway towards, a very very important pathway towards greater systemic reform.
I could not possibly agree more. And, I think the extent to which I don't believe in throwing out any tool. I think a lot of change comes from direct action and protest and those kinds of outside avenues. But I think electoral politics is still a tool. And I think regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, that tool is sort of sharpened by ranked choice voting because it actually is a more democratic process to elect our officials. Can you just briefly tell the audience how they might be able to get involved in this fight and what they can do to progress the movement for ranked choice?
Yes. So the best thing they could do is join their local state chapter. So if you're, it's the best way you could do is go to fairvote.org, or I'll give you another address as well, is rankthevote.us. I'll repeat that, rankthevote.us. Yep, that's it. And that will also outline where your local state chapters are. If you're in a state where there is a ballot measure going on, then you should absolutely get involved in that ballot measure. So Washington State has three active ballot measures right now. So that I mentioned, there's San Juan County, Clark County, and Seattle. So absolutely. And have you got the Mobilize link? So you can,
Oh, I'm going to link that in the description. Yeah.
yeah,
So for those
okay.
in Washington State, check the description of this interview, and you can find a link to kind of tell you where to get involved in those various elections that Vinay's talking about.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you the link now, but it'll be in there. It's mobilize, MOBILIZE .us/ fair vote WA. Mobilize.us/fair vote WA, and that will help you get involved in some of the ones that are happening in Washington State. There's also two happening in Oregon, one in Portland, Oregon, and Multnomah County. There's the state of Nevada right now, which is voting on whether to adopt it, and there's a couple of others as well. There's one in Maine, like just a city one. There's one in California. There's one in Evanston, Illinois, as well. So, um, and there are ways to assist um, if you want to assist those ballot measures, and you're not in the state, then join your local state chapter, and they should be able to let you know. Or you can follow me on Twitter and message me, and I can help you connect you.
Absolutely. Go follow him on Twitter at Orekondy Vinay. Thank you so much again for taking the time as always, Vinay. I'm sure that we will talk soon. I really appreciate you bringing this to the audience. I think it's a really important fight, and I hope that people will get involved.
No worries. Thanks so much.